if you're doing this, if you're practicing the way it works to practice, if you're doing the meditation the way it works to do it, right? And if you get the gist of this, if you understand what's possible, if you get the idea conceptually of what's possible and who you are, right? And then if you start to work with that and start to move with that and start to expose yourself to the learning and start to do the practicing consistently, and then start to look at how this applies to life. How does what you're experiencing and learning get applied to who you're being in the world? How does it work in your relationships? How does it work in relationship to your body? How does it work in relationship to money, right? How does it work in relationship to the inevitables, old age, sickness, and death? How does it work in relationship to the instability and the unpredictability of life, you know? Because there's nowhere to rest your head. You know what I mean? There's nowhere that there's any consistency in the everyday experience we have of our lives. Except if you start to pay attention to this awareness and you start to appreciate the fact that this is the only thing that never changes. It is the only thing that never changes. It is the only thing that's completely stable. It is the only thing that you can count on that won't be different. It's always exactly the same. And because that's the case, it can be the ground of being. It can be it can be where you stand to experience your life. Just that idea of having some place to stand that doesn't change. You know what I mean? Having some place to stand that is consistent and stable and real and awake, right? To have that place to stand and then to deepen your experience of that place. To realize that that's not just a place, it's actually you. It's actually your nature, right? And the more that that becomes clear, and the clearer it is, and the more that starts to become the identity that you're living, your life has got to transform. It's got to transform. It's got to, and you've got to experience your transcendental nature. What do I mean by that? Your transcendental nature is the nature you have as awareness that is above the physical plane. Transcends the physical plane, right? So that where the suffering is, you're above that now because you're the awareness which is unaffected by what's going on.
I was just going to say, kind of scientifically speaking, I guess awareness is like a reference point. It's from where everything else is not measured, but it's a reference point. It's like home base. I was just thinking that thought as you were talking about it there.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant when I said ground of being. You know what I mean? A lot of teachers refer to who we are, if you want to talk about it in mathematical terminology, zero. We're zero, right? And zero is a reference point, isn't it? Yeah, it's a reference point. It's a placeholder, right? And then once that's in place, everything can make sense from there, right? Positive numbers, negative numbers, calculations, all the rest of it can make sense once you're established with that which never changes, which is zero.
Yeah, because when I meditate, I often think of that as like running an antivirus program. It's like, let's put the program back to basic, you know?
Yeah, that's not a bad analogy, right? An antivirus program, except that if the antivirus program is successful, right, and you recondition or you undo the problematic programming and the corrupt files and all the rest of it, right, that once that succeeds, right, that what happens is that the whole thing disappears and there's no program. So first you're undoing, this is one of the things that the Swami was talking about when I was listening to him today. He said from the Advaita Vedanta perspective, meditation's purpose is to calm the mind. Because what they're saying is the most important thing is to get rid of the ignorance and replace it with knowledge, right? So the simple way of saying that is get rid of the idea you have about who you are and replace it with the truth about who you are. That's replacing ignorance with knowledge, right? But even having done that, right, if your mind is so agitated and unstable and unruly, right, what good is that information is not going to make any difference because in the actual experience of your life, you're still in crazy town. You have knowledge, but you can't apply the knowledge because you're in crazy town, right? It's just like you hear people say that come to the class, that don't come back. Oh, I can't do that. My mind was racing the whole time. My mind was racing the whole time. So meditation, whether you look at it from an Advaita Vedanta perspective that knowledge is the key, or from a Zen perspective that, because you have to, from a Zen perspective, what a Zen practitioner might say is, well, you know, knowledge may be useful and valuable, but it's still within the realm of being conceptual. And the truth is non-conceptual. Better that we should go directly there. Past the whole business of any conceptual understanding, go right to the non-conceptual, go right to the direct experience of who you are. You may not be able to say what it is, but don't worry about that. You know, once you're home, you're home. It doesn't matter what you call it, right? So that's one of the ways that a Zen practitioner could talk about this, right? And the Advaita Vedanta practitioner talks about it in terms of, well, and it's not an argument against that. What they say is, you know, a step in the process is to have the knowledge, and even though it's conceptual, it's truer than what you used to think. It's actually, it's symbolizing the truth, where what you used to think didn't symbolize anything because it just wasn't true. When you used to think you were something that you weren't, it just wasn't true, right? So that'll get you nowhere. If you learn what you are, even though it's conceptual, at least that concept's pointing to something that is true. So in that sense, the Advaita Vedanta teaching is meaningful, but even an Advaita Vedanta teacher would agree that meditation is necessary, and ultimately the realization is beyond the concepts, beyond the knowledge. But the knowledge gives you, especially if you're still dealing with things in a conceptual way, the knowledge gives you something to work with that can be the stepping stone to beyond what's conceptual, like that.
I know we've said that this is an illusion or whatever, but it seems that there are people that can reinvent themselves. I guess with awareness being the constant, you just kind of just say, I'm sick of this, I'm just going to like reinvent myself, move to the West Coast, change everything. And some people seem to be successful at that. And they, you know, deep inside, they might not understand it, but it's the awareness is the constant, and they just reinvent themselves. I know we've talked about, the new car, the new bride, all these things, they eventually fail, but it seems that some people can reinvent themselves.
Well, my response to that is...
Maybe prisoners that get out of prison, some of them are successful.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, there's a difference between transformation and change. So people that change by changing where I live, changing how I look, changing my hair, you know, all that, that's just change, right? And the key to what you were saying is it seems. Don't forget that the ordinary world in which we live is based on appearances. That's why people are so crazy about looking good, right? It's so important to look good because everything is based on appearances, right? So all you have to do is appear to know what you're doing. That's sufficient. Politicians do it all day long. all they have to appear to know what they're doing, right? But after the election, nobody's paying attention to that anymore, you know? So the thing is, you have to understand the difference between transformation and change. Yeah, some people transform, and that transformation is not, as you were saying, completely changing. How did you say it's changing themselves?
Yeah,
Reinventing themselves, right? Yeah. So what I'm making is a distinction between reinventing yourself and changing your personality. Changing your personality might look like reinventing yourself, but that person may have no idea who they really are, right? So there's a difference between and you don't have to reinvent yourself. Yourself doesn't change, you know. So there's nothing to reinvent, right?
The awareness is the constant.
Right. So it's easy to get confused with these things, you know, but I guarantee you that somebody who's just changing things for the sake of changing things is not going to get anywhere with that eventually, because one of the reasons people change things is because the way it was before they changed it wasn't working. And then they change it, and the way it is after they change it stops working, and then they change it, you know what I mean? So life becomes an endless process of changing. And after a while, it gets pretty tiring, you know what I mean? If you have to keep changing where you live, changing your relationships, changing your jobs, changing all that, after a while, it wears you out, you know? And as you get older, you just can't, you can't do it.
I haven't times in meditation been able to see thoughts or deeply held beliefs and see how crazy they are. And that realization has helped me in my personality, I guess. It's changed that. So is that the awareness at work, or is that just a quiet moment of meditation, or is,
Well,
because that's the kind of transformation that or change or whatever, because I've had that experience multiple times where I'm like, oh, I believe this and that, you know, and I can see it in a new way.
well, the way you're describing it, it sounds to me like it's awareness at work, you know? Because usually if it's not that and it's personality, the change you're gonna make, you start talking about that as a better way of being than the way you were, right? But that's not what you're saying. You're saying an awareness is there that it's recognizing things that are limited and unworkable, and out of the recognition stops following that. Yeah, that sounds more like a wake-up experience. You know, and just the fact that you've been doing this work and practicing meditation, you know, that's more likely to be the case, yeah. So thank you for the question.